Welcome to a Climate Conversation podcast. This is a podcast series that we have developed to be a complement to a climate conversation documentary, which is the vision and project of Walt Johnson. He and his wife, Rami, actually took money out of their retirement account to create this documentary. It's a very important documentary. And Walt Johnson, thank you for all that you've done. And we never envisioned that we would be having these great podcasts that we're recording on a regular basis.
Well, thank you to everyone else who helped make this such a good project. Thank you.
Well, and Dave O'Rourke, our spokesman for A Climate Conversation, you and I are both on a learning curve like we can't believe, and I cannot believe the guest that we have today, and that is Dr. John Clauser. And Dr. Clauser, well, Dave, first of all, great to see you.
Great to see you, Kim. It's great to be here. I'm expecting a particularly good podcast today. I think we have a great guest.
Well, absolutely. And our guest is Dr. John Clauser. And Dr. Clauser, we are thrilled to be recording this podcast today. So welcome.
Thank you.
So Dave O'Rourke, it's good to have you. And Dave O'Rourke, you have really put together some great information, great questions. So where do you want to begin?
Well, we'd agreed with Dr. Clauser that a good format for us today will be to go through a deck that he has presented to a number of organizations and institutions this year. I've had a chance to look at some of the notes, and I have an idea that we're in for a terrific conversation today about the costs and benefits, the challenges, the realities, and the science of this subject of climate change. And who better to talk about science than a Nobel laureate in physics with a background from Caltech and Columbia, and a remarkable brain, and I would say an iconoclastic and brave brain. And so I'm super excited to see this information today. And I think people who watch this podcast series are in for some welcome news. This is good news today, and I'm happy I get to be here to hear it.
So with that, Dr. Clauser, first of all, very impressive, 2022 Physics Nobel laureate. And they noted you as a climate change denier as well. So tell us a little bit about this journey.
Well, actually, my thesis advisor at Columbia actually was the inventor of the climate greenhouse gas model for planets. In particular, he was studying Venus at the time. So, and he had my office mates, also graduate students, were working on global circulation models for Venus. He was the one who actually discovered the enormously high surface temperature and pressure on the planet Venus. And so, excuse me, I had some early indoctrination into all of this. Jim Hansen had an office right across the hall from me at Goddard Institute for Space Studies, which is where most of the computer modeling is now being done. So I have an early developed an early interest into this problem. Only recently have I been able to have a forum to say anything about it. So what I have here is that I developed in the last year or so, a talk that I have presented at any number of places. Back in March, I presented it at the Church Militant group in Baltimore, then Clintel Irish Climate Science Foundation in May, at ICA, the Europeanische Institute für Klimat und Energy. I'm sure that's my German pronunciation is terrible. That was in Vienna in June, and this the latest version was presented in for a group called Doctors for Disaster Preparedness, a group that was kind of started by Willie Soon at Harvard, and that was in July. So if you want, I can just go ahead and start going through the slide deck.
Dave, I think that sounds great. Yes.
Thank you.
I can't wait. I'm super excited about this.
Okay. So anyway, so where we go. There we go. Okay. First, there's talk is in two parts. The first part is I have the backwards here in the title, is that climate change is a myth. I was sort of found that this part was necessary in order to motivate the second, which I think is the much more important part. This is really happening in the climate. But first one needs to understand where the IPCC and its collaborators have totally flubbed their task of understanding the Earth's climate. They have attempted to identify the dominant process. They have been to do so. They have been tasked to use computer modeling and observational data to determine some very important parameters for the Earth's climate. And these include the so-called power imbalance, whereupon this is used to, what they claim is to prove the existence of global warming. They have tried to measure the Earth's albedo. I'll spend a certain amount of time talking about that. And understand the natural power bounce feedback stability to determine whether or not there is indeed an imminent climate crisis, or whether or not there are so-called tipping points. I assert they have totally botched all of those measurements, calculations, and tasks. And they have done so not just due to incompetence, but a lot of it is dishonest and intentionally making intentionally erroneous claims. So correspondingly, I claim that the IPCC and its collaborators, their claims of an impending climate crisis is totally bogus.
Wow.
Okay, so let me proceed onwards on this. Their first sacred, what I would call a sacred task, this is sacred because there are trillions of dollars riding on their getting it right. They have botched it. The task is to calculate and measure the power imbalance. The power, as in the power imbalance is the difference between the incoming power, which is sunlight heating, and the outgoing power, which has two components, the reflected sunlight and the re-radiated infrared heat. And so the basic simple idea is that we have more power flowing in than power flowing out. And that's actually the definition of global warming, that that's the cause rather than the effect. The power flow imbalance then results in an energy buildup if there's more power flowing in. That in turn causes a temperature rise, also known as global warming. So they claim with great certainty that the Earth has a proven net warming positive power imbalance. They claim there's more sunlight power incident than there is power lost. Okay. Based on this, they assemble a whole house of cards argument that forebodes an impending climate change apocalypse and catastrophe. One should, unfortunately, they came to this conclusion before they'd even finished looking at all of the data. They came to this conclusion back in 2009, kind of when and were pressured into it back when all the various governments, including the United States, were trying to pass cap and trade laws. And most of the data that I will show that where they actually came to this conclusion was after that. Okay, so first off, what is this house of cards that I'm talking about? If we have global warming, if it's proven to be true, this in turn, they argue, leads to climate change. Climate change, in turn, leads to an increased frequency of extreme weather events and other bad phenomena like sea level rise, etc. The increased frequency of extreme weather events, in turn, leads to a global apocalypse and a so-called climate crisis. Worse yet, Noah jumped on the bandwagon and claims to have actually observed. I will show you later on that that's totally bogus. They claim to have observed an increasing frequency of extreme weather events. They go further. They claim that this warming power imbalance is claimed to be caused by a build of atmospheric greenhouse gases, in particular CO2. And finally, they insist that trillions of dollars be spent to limit, prevent, reverse atmospheric buildup of greenhouse gases, in the process bankrupting the whole world. Okay, I believe that that house has collapsed. Number one, the very basis of this is global warming, a power imbalance. I assert they have not proven it. The power balance observational data are fully consistent with no warming whatsoever. I assert their claims, this is not just idle claims or incompetence. This is intentionally, dishonestly fudged data. And I will show you specifically exactly where this is done and who did it and exactly how the numbers have been fudged. Remember, there were both an observational and a computer modeling. This is the computer models use seriously flawed physics in them and can't get anywhere near simulating the climate. And I mentioned before that NOAA has claimed they have observed an increase. I'll show that those claims are totally bogus. Now, without global warming, there's no climate change crisis. The house of cards collapses. They have requested trillions of dollars. I claim that those requests are totally dishonest, grab for money. They are wrong. Okay, first let's go to the computer modeling. This was performed mostly by the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, which is where I wrote my PhD thesis at Columbia. It is totally incapable of simulating the past climate over the past several decades. It can't even approximately simulate the Earth's temperature history. They can't get anywhere near close to simulating the Earth's total albedo, the amount of reflected sunlight there is. The discrepancies between their calculations and their observed data are huge, much bigger than the claimed imbalance. They are off by a whole factor of 2 in the observed cloud albedo. So the imbalance is claimed to be 0.5 watt per square meter squared incident power per square meter of Earth's surface. The discrepancies with the data are 10 to 15 watts, and there's a huge error in the observed by 80 watts, and they claim that they've got it to within 0.5 watt. Okay, the total, I'm not the first to notice this, by the way. This was, there's a group of calculations it did called the CMIP5 computer modeling, and a recent book by Steve Koonin, who was Barack Obama's White House science advisor. He wrote a recent book, Unsettled, What Climate Science Tells Us, Why It Doesn't and Why It Matters. He also was very critical of their claims. Okay, so let's look at what they have claimed. This is a graph which comes, from the IPCC's 5th assessment report in 2013. Shows what they call the temperature anomaly. Okay, this was made 2005. So to the left of the graph there are gray curves. They are the actual various. Okay, all these huge number of gray curves on the left, and on the right are the various models which they have chosen. Not one of them, of the more than 50 different models, gets anywhere near predicting the actual or even simulating the past historical data. Okay, so the black line is the observed temperature history. The gray lines are the historical, the model's attempts to simulate that. The colored curves are the various predictions. Okay, one of the problems is that they predict, that's even worse, is that everything they do is to predict a temperature anomaly. What the hell is a temperature anomaly? They don't tell you what it is. It is there's some reference value of 0. They don't tell you what is that reference value of 0. So it's virtually impossible to do your own calculations. And it's impossible to compare one author's temperature anomaly to another because they don't know that they have the same reference value of 0. So you'll notice that they are totally incapable of simulating the past history, and these discrepancies are huge, much bigger than what they claim. Okay, worse yet, the temperature measurements are made mostly over land. Land occupies only 30% of the Earth's surface. Ocean temperature measurements are extremely sparse. Most of the area is totally inaccessible for measurements. And it varies, temperature varies very strongly from one spot to another. Measuring over land, you have what's called the urban heat island effect. If you put the thermometer in the middle of a concrete jungle in downtown, it's probably going to be hotter than if you put it out in the middle of a nice green forest. So much better, and even the IPCC agrees with that, the mixing up cause and effect, a much better indicator of global warming is to look at the temperature, the power imbalance, as I mentioned earlier. And the IPCC agrees. Actually, the IPCC has several definitions. It's bad science to multiply define things. But certainly some of their definitions, they agree and spend an enormous amount of time talking about the power imbalance. An important component of power imbalance is what's called albedo. What the heck is albedo? It's a very fancy word. It is really very simple. It's the fraction of light, sunlight that gets reflected. A certain amount of sunlight coming in, a lot of it reflects. If it doesn't reflect, it is absorbed by the earth. Okay, so this is a very simple way of describing how much of the sunlight is actually absorbed. It's the ratio of reflected sunlight power to the incident sunlight power. Okay, if it reflects back out into space, it can't heat the earth anymore. So it's just another equivalent way of expressing the heating and cooling. So if you measure the power imbalance, you got to measure effectively or calculate this albedo. So any errors you make in this calculating the albedo or measuring it are reflected in the errors in the power imbalance. So they're equivalent definitions of the same entity. Their computer is pathetically incapable of simulating the Earth's annual. The albedo varies annually. It's totally. All their modeling is totally incapable of simulating, computer simulating the Earth's albedo. Correspondingly, the error, imbalance error, is 14 times bigger than the measured power imbalance, and 25 times bigger than the power imbalance error range. So there's clearly very serious discrepancy. Okay, so here is a graph exactly of that. The color curves are the Goddard Institute for Studies, Space Studies, CMIP-5 computer simulations, or comparable to those curves I gave you of the temperature anomaly. Okay, I have this is their predictions for the Earth's albedo as a function of year. This is a 10-year average. The black curve labeled Sarah's data, those are the satellite measurements of the Earth's albedo. You'll know I pointed out that albedo was equivalent to measure the outgoing reflected sunlight power. You can see that that's their model variations are the order of 10 watts per square meter. Between the measured data and the model predictions are huge. Okay, and you'll notice that this is not a simple sinusoidal oscillation. So you need 12 points at least to specify it. They don't use that. Okay, so this added equivalent scale means you need to assume an input power. If we're talking about albedo, remember it's the ratio of the reflected power to the input power. Here, the assumption is that the input solar sunlight power is 340 watts per square meter. And they claim that the average reflected power is about 100 watts. Well, yeah, you can see that, and that's the added scale that I have added to the left. But this is okay. The 340 watts is what's called the solar constant. It's misnamed. We'll get to that in a minute. So you can see that the modeling is grossly incapable of predicting the reality. The majority of the sunlight power is reflected by the clouds. I will describe that later. And they can't even get the oscillation phase correct in the calculation. Despite those huge errors, they claim that they have precisely calculated and measured the power, and that it's 0.7 watts per square meter. This claim is an article of what I refer to as the bad penny that keeps showing up, and this has been showing up for more than 20 years. Okay, this figure was written by one of the authors, Stevens, et al. In 2015. The IPCC's 2021 assessment report number 6 hides this figure and refuses to, does not show it. Okay, I mentioned earlier that the solar constant is not really constant. Okay, Stevens in 2015, you look at the this bottom curve here. This solid line here is the actual solar power, how much sunlight power is reaching the Earth. That's actually varying annually by the order of 22 watts per square meter. And that's just due to the fact that the Earth's orbit is not exactly circular. It's closer to the closer to the sun in the winter than it is in the summer, due to the fact that the Earth is in an elliptic orbit, and that gives you the order of typically 20 to 30 watts per square meter variation, especially when you add on what they claim to be the reflected power. Okay, so this should be straightforward to measure, right? Remember that global warming is just simply defined as more. You can't have more than one definition. At least not in science. Right? Politicians do all the time. But it's defined as more power coming in than more power going out. Okay, I mentioned before, power in is sunlight. They claim it to be about 340 watts per square. And it varies by the order of 20 watts, which they never mention. Okay, the output has 2 components. There's the reflected sunlight. That's the order of about 100 watts. Okay, the other component is the re-radiated heat. You put your hand out, you can feel re-radiated heat. Okay, easy peasy, right? Just all you have to do is measure the power going out, the power in, and you subtract. It's not that easy. The power in and power out are huge numbers, and the difference between them is minuscule, 0.2% of the power coming in. And so that's the error you have to get below in these measurements. Otherwise, the errors in your measurement of either the power in or the power out will totally swamp the difference that you try to calculate between these two numbers. And it's made worse, because all of these numbers are hugely varying in time. You can see these huge variations on the input sunlight power. There are huge amounts of variations in the sunlight power by weather, by cloud cover. And in fact, so this was assigned to various, to measure this stuff, was assigned to various groups, NASA in particular. And most of the observers, and in fact, they admit this in their publications, kind of threw up their hands and says, "You got to be kidding. It's virtually impossible to measure these values to the degree of accuracy that you require." And they put this into their publications. The IPCC reports cover all of that up. I assert that none of the reported data, if you actually go back and look at the scientific articles, none find a convincing net warming power. How has it been done? Well, there have been a series of satellite measurements. The IRBI and the Ceres Terra and Aqua satellites, where you use radiometry, just sort of like holding up a light meter when you're taking a photograph. The ocean heat content measured using a chain of buoys all over the world in the ocean, water sampling, temperatures, and there's a whole huge network of ground observations using what's called the baseline surface radiation network. All of these various measurements, by the way, are in gross disagreement with each other. And nobody can argue which ones are right, which ones are wrong. Totally covered up in all of the IPCC reports. When you actually go back and read the reports, they admit to these errors. And worse yet, in many of these huge errors, there are huge gaps in the data. The satellites will malfunction. They don't have nowhere near enough data. They have not anywhere near enough data samples to. So what they do, they just simply make it up. They fabricate the data to fill in the gaps. In science, that's one of our little no-nos. You can't fabricate data. The reported data are totally fudged, and they're totally fudged in a data manner that dishonestly claims them from changing them from showing no warming to actually showing warming. They call this adjusting the data. I call it fudging. They even admitted in their publications, when it gets translated into the IPCC reports, those admissions are all wrong. I'm not the only person to have noticed this fudging.
Hey, Dr. Klauser.
Yes.
My son always wanted to adjust the data on his report card.
Of course. Yeah, that's exactly what the IPCC is doing. Okay. So how do they, where do you need to look to find this? I'll show you in a minute on exactly where. Okay, they show a power flow map, each of the various groups. Where is the power? And the top line is, you got to pick an altitude where you're going to define the power flow. Conventionally, that's done at what's called the top of atmosphere. To be consistent, you've got to report all the numbers at the same altitude. And in the power flow maps, by convention, these three numbers are right at the top of the picture. And if you don't believe my claims, just take a look at the pictures and do the arithmetic yourself. Okay, so what is the simple calculation of power flow in minus power out? Okay, so we calculate the power in, 340 watts, the solar constant, and some measure of the error, plus or minus some error. The outgoing, that's the reflected solar power. That's the order of 100 watts, so they claim. The outgoing re-emitted infrared heat, that's the order of 240. So you sum those numbers, and you will get the imbalance. Okay, so how do you add the errors? The standard method is you take the root mean square of the various errors. So the sum of the squares of all of the various errors, the square root of that sum. That gives you the effective error for the imbalance to be expected, assuming that the numbers are not correlated. And the reports do not specify any sort of correlation between that. These are apparently all just instrumental errors or fluctuations from one measurement to the next. So an important cross-check that any reasonable science immediately noticed, and I seem to be the only one to have done this, is that you can't get any smaller. The error in the imbalance can't be any smaller than the error of one of the input numbers, so that the imbalance error has to be bigger than the incident power error, bigger than the outgoing, the reflected error, sunlight error, and the outgoing heat. Okay, so if they're asked the question, well, is there global warming? So if the imbalance is less than the error in the imbalance, then this suggests that we have no warming. If it's greater, then we have a warming. Okay, so let's look at some of the actual data. The earliest data were by Stevens et al. In 1981 and reanalyzed in 1987 by Ramanathan. Okay, these were based on the IRBI satellite, the Earth Radiation Budget Experiment. And they only used 4 data samples, partially analyzed 4 different months of the year. They assumed that it was sinusoidal variation, as more recent are not. Okay, so here on the left-hand column is Stevens et al. Report, the 344 minus 103.2 minus 234.7. I add those numbers and I get plus 6.8. They add the numbers and they get plus 9. They don't mention, okay, but it's noticed that they mention plus or minus 10. So that's consistent with no warming. Ramanathan goes through and he gets 0. Okay. Here is his power flow diagram. The Ramanathan's on the right. Here's the sunlight power coming in. Here's the 241.3. I can't read it very well. Okay. Now, what Ramanathan also did, okay, before I leave him, the National Academy, U.S. National Academy in 2003 looked at this in an important report that in 2003, Understanding Climate Change Feedbacks, and they said the observations do not meet quality standards. That's a direct quote from National Academy. Ramanathan, okay, also invented an important convention that is continuously used, where they pointed out, well, we can't really quite analyze it all, so we're going to assume that the Earth is divided into two distinct areas: the cloudy sky as in overcast, and clear sky, as in totally clear sky. And there's nothing in between. Partly cloudy days are disallowed. And that, here, Loeb et al. Admit, this is a direct quote, what I said earlier, a limitation of the satellite data is their inability to provide absolute measure of the net top of atmosphere radiation imbalance to the required accuracy level.
Wow.
That's a direct quote. What they have been tasked to do. So they simply go through and reanalyze the Ramanathan and Stevens' results, and they simply change the numbers. And they add new values that claim, oh, we're going to reanalyze it and show that there is global warming. And so they do this mostly from urging from Jim Hansen to use, well, we're going to throw out the satellite data, and instead we're going to use the ocean buoy data. Actually, the ocean buoy data are much worse. So here's what they came up with in their two reports. Okay, so, and by the way, the ocean buoy data have huge data gaps, so they just fabricated the data to fill in these huge gaps. Okay, so here in the first column, we have the Rebi satellite data, which shows this actually, if you add these numbers, you get 1.6 watts per square meter of cooling. The ocean heat content data show plus 0.9 watts. They don't have any error bars. And here they say, but in the same paper, then they finally throw out all those numbers and say, we analyze this to be 0.64 plus or minus 0.11 watts per square meter. How they could get those incredible precision. This is a very important number to remember. This is what I refer to as the bad penny. Pardon the old proverbial metaphor, it keeps showing up over and over again, and you will see it. Okay. So then Loeb, that was Loeb et al. And Stevens et al. Remember, Stevens did the 1981, 30 years earlier analysis. They also admit in 2012 paper that yes, satellite data really don't show much. But so they join forces, and they include a fellow named Lecoyer and others, and they switch to using the ocean heat content, and they do a calculation and present new data. Okay, here are their numbers: 340.2 minus 100 minus 239.7. When I do that sum, I get plus 0.5, plus or minus 3.9 watts error. No way of measuring it. They usually stuff in the bad penny. They say, well, it's 0.6 plus or minus 0.4. Where they come up with that, who knows? Okay, and they even admit, if you read the paper, they admit to having adjusted the data. They don't notice the fact that they can't do arithmetic. They do not show how they calculate their error bars. They clearly don't use the standard formula for calculating the error bars. They did increase the error bars. Okay, remember Loeb had 0.11 error bar limit, plus or minus 0.1. they at least said, well, it's maybe 0.4 watts error. Okay, and if you don't believe that, here is their graph, right, copied directly out of the Stevens 2012. Here is their so-called top of atmosphere heat budget. Here are those numbers that I pulled out of it, and here's their power flow diagram of power coming in, sunlight power being reflected, re-radiated heat. Okay, so moving on to 2015. Lecoyer, who was one of the co-authors of that one, apparently came up with a minority report. Loeb and Stevens are no longer authors of the 2015 paper. And he, rather than use and compared the ocean heat content, just so the ocean heat content data alone, actually they still had to use the satellite measurements of the reflected, of the outgoing re-rated solar power. He gets, Lecoyer et al. Get 0 plus or minus 0.5, 0 plus or minus 3.5 for the what they call constrained or unconstrained data. Okay, so, and here is their power flow map from their paper. Okay, so here again, those numbers. Here's the outgoing radiated heat. Here's the incoming solar power. Here's the reflected solar power. Okay, so this discrepancy did not go unnoticed. Trenberth and Fasullo at National Center for Atmospheric Research, NCAR, read this, and they pointed out that, gee, you're mixing apples and oranges here because you're using top of the atmosphere measurements for the re-radiated heat, but you're measuring surface measurements from the for measuring the ocean heat content. This is again mostly at Hanson's pressure to do so, and they were very critical of Loeb, Stevens, Lecoyer, and Hanson's claim of understanding what's going on in between the top of the atmosphere and the surface. And they noticed that this is not a trivial difference. There's a huge missing energy. And they asked the question in an article in Science magazine, where does this energy go? Okay, in response to this, Hanson et al. Says, oh, it's just satellite calibration errors. Okay, nonetheless, Trenberth, Fasullo, again come back at this point. There are still huge discrepancies in the total power. I commend Trenberth and Fasullo and Balsada. These were some of the early whistleblowers. I mentioned Steve Koonin recently as one such. Okay, remember Lecoyer was one of wrote the minority report. Well, we still had this outlying discrepancy between Stevens et al. And Lecoyer et al. And so they get together and they publish literally it's a mea culpa article where they admit that these were the choosing between the ocean heat content data and the CERS satellite data was the quote unjustified and ad hoc choice. And miraculously, they're both right. Sort of like, if you recall, the Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Well, yeah, we did put the carrot on our nose, but she's still a witch. So anyway, okay, so they admit, yeah, we did fudge the data. We admit that the adjustments do need, and that these adjustments, the order of 10 watts per square meter, need to be made. But nonetheless, our earlier number, or Stevens, who was the lead author, the earlier numbers are still right. 0.6 plus or minus 0.4. Remember the bad penny. Okay, so here, if you don't believe that, here's from the Stevens-Lecuyer article in Atmospheric Research. Here they have these two numbers for the outgoing re-radiated heat. Here's the incoming solar power. Here's the outgoing reflected solar power. Those are the numbers, okay? And here they are, grabbing those numbers. Here's what they claim. Okay, the ocean heat content data, they say they have, these are the three numbers for the ocean heat. Sorry, I should cut that. Okay, I add these numbers and I get 0 plus or minus 5.6 watts, no warming whatsoever. They add these numbers and they get the bad penny again, 0.6 plus or minus 0.4. They put that in the line 5 of the abstract of the paper. Okay, the Ceres analyte. So if they had to say they're the same, they get 0, but it's plus or minus 5.6 watts. Okay, moving on. In 2019, Vild et al. Okay, he comes out with a new, remember, the Ramanathan divided the sky into two parts, cloudy, overcast, and clear sky. So he produced new analysis of the clear sky results in 2019. And he needed this to get a clear sky albedo. I'll mention that in a minute. Okay, he copies, has a power flow diagram very similar to this. Okay, in 2021, 2 years later, the IPCC put out the so-called final word in the 6th assessment report in 2021, where they just pretty much exactly copied their result. But they added additional fudges. Okay, here the left-hand curve is Vild et al.'s 2019 power flow diagrams. Again, here's the all sky, 340 watts, 100 watts, 239 watts. Here's what happens when you only have a clear sky. And then here's a nearly identical power flow diagram, except you'll notice that they airbrushed out a few of and changed the numbers. Here, the lower left-hand corner here is the bad penny, 0.6 watts. Okay, that they just simply made up. And here, well, AR6 for some reason just simply changed that. They claim that they're just quoting Vild et al., but they're not quite. Okay, so here are those numbers, the same numbers. 340.5, 98, minus 239. Here are their error bars. I add those numbers and I get 3.5 plus or minus 3.6. What do they say? The bad penny, 0.6 plus or minus 0.4. They can't add. And all you have to do is get those graphs and add the numbers yourself. Okay, here's the IPCC's assessment report in 2021. They also can't add. They say, well, okay, I add those numbers and I get 2.5 to add their numbers and their error bars, and I get 2.5 plus or minus 3.0. No warming. They adjust the bad penny a little bit, and they say, well, it's plus or minus, or this 0.7 from 0.6. But they say, well, we're going to drop the error bar by a factor of 2. Actually, they drop it by a factor of 4 because they now claim it's a 2 sigma error bar, not a 1 sigma error bar. So plus or minus 0.2. Even worse, they have an even fancier way of fudging. Both of them. They notice here they go, rather than showing error bars, they round off these numbers, 340. Okay, and then the error bars, they hit limits they put in here, both rounded off. They do not, and the same thing true here, where they just simply use rounded off to the last watt per square centimeter. Unfortunately, they do not include the additional error created by the round-off error. This is what I call bad, dishonest science. I assert this is dishonest because this has been repeated over and over and over again, and nobody seems to have noticed the fact that they can't do their own damn arithmetic. Okay, while we're here, we look at two important observations to show you what the hell is really going on. The so-called cloudy sky albedo. Remember, the build that all now, we had two parts. We have the whole sky. We have composed of two parts, the cloudy sky and the cloud-free sky. Each one has its own separate albedo. I will show that there's an error by a whole factor of 2 in this. Okay, the second one is a simple observation. If you look, this is this. Let me back up here. You look at this number right here. This is the heat loss that's from the surface of the Earth by evaporation. These are very important observations, and they will show that most of the sunlight energy incident on the Earth is not used by the Earth for warming. It is simply used for evaporating water. And 70% of the Earth's area is water. 73% of the sunlight energy that hits it is used simply for evaporating water, because that's where the water is. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, first let me point out the factor of 2 error. Okay, there's a very simple conservation of energy that one can assume that the component albedos, as in the albedo, the reflectivity of the whole planet, you can break it down into 2 areas, is the area-weighted average of the 2 components. Okay, the cloud fraction times the albedo of the clouds, etc. Okay, those numbers are now all available on the AR6 report, and they point out, and everybody seems to agree, that the whole sky albedo is 0.3, as in 100 watts divided by 340 watts. The clear sky albedo, now new on the build et al., okay, shows that the clear sky diagram says that the albedo for clear sky, the cloud-free sky, is 0.33, just grabbing their numbers. And we use 0.67 is the cloud fraction. Everybody seems to agree on that. That gives you a cloudy sky, that the reflectivity of the top of the clouds, if you want to conserve energy, is 0.36. And clouds are dark, not white. I'll show you some pictures in a minute when I get part 2, that they are very, very white. Okay. Moreover, if you fly, Griggs et al., if you fly over the most of the clouds are Pacific stratus clouds. 1988, Griggs et al. Flew over in a DC-3 aircraft and measured a typical reasonable value of 0.8, not 0.36. We're off by a factor of 2. Okay, the second one is to notice that, that I mentioned before is what does the sunlight do when it reaches the Earth? Notice that, okay, most people believe, well, what does it do? Well, it warms the Earth, right? Well, that may be true over land. Land is only 30% of the Earth. Oceans cover 70% of the Earth. Temperature measurements are never made in the oceans because you can't get there. So 70% of the sunlight falls on the oceans. That's where the area is. And that's where virtually all of the Earth's exposed water is in the oceans. So we had 160 watts absorbed by the whole Earth, meaning the 70% is absorbed by the oceans. So if you look at that number I pulled off the AR6 power flow diagram, it says 82 watts. Okay, so that's more than half of the Earth for the whole Earth, but it's 73%. Virtually 3/4 of the input energy absorbed by the Earth's oceans are used not for warming the Earth, but for simply making clouds. That's what happens when you evaporate water. It evaporates upwards and produces clouds. So it's fairly clear that the dominant use of sunlight energy is to make clouds. Okay, let me pause for a second and mention one more piece of gross dishonesty or incompetence, or what I would call a technocon, where you're just simply throwing out pseudoscience when hoping nobody will notice. There was an article in 2012, Physics Today, the American Institute of Physics trade journal for physicists, predicting and managing extreme weather events. Earth's climate is warming and destructive weather is growing more prevalent. Coping with changes will require collaborative science, forward-thinking policy, and informed politics. The two authors were not scientists. They were Jane Lubchenco, who was Undersecretary for the Department of Commerce, and NOAA Administrator Thomas Carl, who was Director of the NOAA's Climate Change Program. Okay, so they assert in that article that there is an observed increase in extreme weather event frequency, that it's associated with climate change, and it is very obviously true in the 3 decades ending in 2012. And I'll show you their own data, figure 2A. They create an index of extreme weather events, which measure the frequency of the so-called extreme weather events. And these include the number of hot spells, number of cold spells, number of droughts, number of floods, number of landfalling hurricanes. Conspicuously absent from that list is EF3 plus tornado frequency. Reason that they left it out, of course, was that actually turns out that was decreasing. And Steve Koonin points that out in his book. Okay, so they assert that the climate extremes index has obviously grown steadily over the last 3 decades. I assert that's total crock of crap. Okay, here is their data copied directly out of Physics Today. Nobody ever uses bar graphs. Scientists normally use slight graphs. So I just simply traced those points. And I traced them twice and plotted them. But on one of them, I flipped 180 degrees. And I won't tell you which one. So this is 100 years worth of extreme climate index event frequency. Okay, and the bars at the bottom are the the quote last 3 years. I won't tell you which one. And so if you look carefully, you'll see that the two are mirror images. One is time proceeding to the right. One of them is time proceeding to the left. I will assert, sort of as a reduction to absurdity, if you can't tell which way time is proceeding here, then it's not at all obvious that this event climate index, extreme weather event index, is dramatically increasing in the last 3 decades. Okay, moving on. Let me finish off part 1. The conclusions. The conclusions are that the Earth has a net warming energy imbalance. The IPCC claims. I believe I have shown here that claim is false. That is the definition of global warming. So without any global warming, there is no climate change crisis. There is an energy crisis, but I'll get on to that later. Okay, so the IPCC bases it on the results on computer modeling. The computer models and the observational data are grossly flawed, dishonestly in places. The computer modeling predictions are totally unreliable. They can't even predict the observed data. They can't even simulate the observed data. There's no way you can trust their predictions, forecasts for the future. None of the observations for measuring the Earth's power imbalance convincingly show that we have a net global warming. Okay, again, various observers have dishonestly fudged their reported data, changed it from showing no warming to showing warming. Okay, and if you don't believe me, go back and redo my arithmetic. It's very simple. You can do it on your calculator on your phone. The data from Build et al. In 2019 and IPCC's 6th assessment report in 2021 indicate that there's a serious factor of 2 error in the applied cloudy sky albedo of 0.36. Just simple measurements and pictures I'll show you in a minute show that clearly clouds are bright white. The more appropriate number is somewhere around 0.8. It's off by a whole factor of 2. Okay. I pointed out that NOAA's claims of a extreme weather event, dangerous extreme weather event frequency, that their own data disprove their own claims. Correspondingly, I am offering here what I consider great news. Despite what you have heard from the IPCC and others, there is no climate crisis. Our planet is not in peril. The IPCC's and NOAA's claims are a totally dishonest hoax. Trillions of dollars are being wasted. Climate crisis is a colossal trillion-dollar hoax. Okay. What are some additional observations? The oceans comprise 70% of the Earth. 73% of the sunlight energy incident on the oceans does not warm the Earth. It just simply makes clouds. Cloud making is the dominant energy usage mechanism of the Earth. Okay, also point out that somewhere they have made a serious error in calculating and measuring cloudy sky albedo. Okay, now, question is, what's really happening? They clearly have botched it. Their first project, an important second sacred task was to identify the dominant process. I claim they have totally misidentified that. And they have scapegoated greenhouse gases as a dominant use. Have used fudge data to make dangerous recommendations for policymakers. I instead assert that the dominant process is what I will call the cloud thermostat mechanism. It provides a natural feedback mechanism that provides the Earth with extremely strong temperature and climate stability. It is a feedback mechanism, and the feedbacks that are associated with greenhouse gases are totally negligible with respect to the power of the cloud thermostat. As a result, the Earth's climate is very, very robustly stable against changes in greenhouse gases and volcanism and other causes. Okay, what is the source of the great strength for this mechanism? It gains its enormous strength from the observed huge climate cover variation. Some days are cloudy and some days are clear, and the variation is totally huge. And it works just like the thermostat in your home. The power imbalance is never zero. It's either furnace is always on or it's always off. And what the thermostat does, it just simply modulates the heating, cooling duty cycle of the furnace. So similar to the furnace in your home, clouds cast dark shadows on the ocean. When they shadow the ocean, the furnace is off. When they don't shadow the ocean, the furnace is on. Okay, and so the furnace strength is the fact that there is this huge variation. Okay, and I'll show you in a minute where I get that. Measurements that were done by a monumentally important paper in 2013 by King et al., who actually measured this with the satellites, long after the IPCC and others show that the strong fluctuation is the order anywhere from 18 to 77 watts per square meter fluctuation. That's the power of the thermostat. Okay, so clouds are modulating the reflected sunlight power. The clouds reflect a lot of light. They're bright white, and they control the power imbalance. So anywhere minimally with at least 18 to 22, it could be as much as 77. Okay, it's much bigger, 26 to 45 times bigger than this 0.7 watts, and they're plus or minus 0.2 watts claimed error measurements. They claim that they have measured this imbalance with great high precision and high confidence levels. I don't know where they get that confidence. Okay, their numbers use very questionable albedo numbers. So I don't really know what is the cloud albedo. So I'll give everybody the benefit of the break, and I'll calculate it both ways. I'll calculate it using the cloud importance of the cloud thermostat using both the IPCC's cloud albedo of 0.3 and my own. If you use my own, then the more realistic 80% reflectivity of clouds, then the power of the thermostat is huge. Okay, so correspondingly, this random fluctuation that you see from cloud cover is not really random at all. It's a critically important part of the thermostat mechanism that's stabilizing the Earth's climate and temperature. Okay, so here's what the sun sees looking at the Earth. You see the land and ocean Okay, the oceans are dark blue. The land is either brown or green. There's Australia, South America, the Pacific Ocean on the right. Clouds are white. They reflect a lot of light. Okay, so what do we look at these? And if you go to the NASA's website, they have lots and lots of these pictures. And you can look at them and they all say the same thing. Cloud coverage is highly variable from one day to the next, from one photograph to the next. Clouds appear to be bright white. They reflect dramatically more sunlight of the planet, just looking at those pictures. Okay, so they're suggesting a cloud reflectivity of about 0.8 to 0.9. For comparison, the white paper is about 99%. So clouds are pretty close to the white part of the screen there. The clear sky or the cloudy free areas are much darker, especially the oceans, which are 70% of the Earth. They have about 16% reflectivity. Nonetheless, I pointed out earlier that the IPCC's sixth assessment report and Bill et al. Claim, just from simple conservation of energy, that the cloud reflectivity is only 0.36. And that means they're claiming that the Earth's reflectivity is about the same with or without clouds. Something clearly very wrong with those numbers. Okay, what do you see when you just stand on a hillside and look down in a valley when on a partly cloudy day, and you can see that clouds form very dark shadows. It's actually, they're much darker than they appear because the blue sky it's not concentrated like it is as a source of sunlight, but it illuminates the ground below the clouds. But if you're descending in an airplane into an airport, look down and you see on a partly cloudy day, you can see that there are very dark shadows. There's a factor of 10 typically in the brightness of the sunlight. You can see this if you have solar panels and you have an ammeter on them. Just watch the output from your solar panels. You'll see minimally the output drops to half when just a simple single solitary cloud passes over the solar panels. Worse yet, try reading a book indoors on a heavily overcast day. Indoors, without turning the lights on. You can't, because it's just too dark. Where did all of that sunlight go? It didn't get absorbed by the water droplets. Do not absorb water. You can see the bottom of a swimming pool brightly illuminated by sunlight. The missing sunlight, 80 to 90% of it gets reflected back out into space. That's the cloud event. Very important paper came out finally after everybody concluded, yes, we have global warming, we're all going to die, by King et al. They analyzed data from the Terra and Aqua satellites, the radiometry data. And they also, from this, they could measure the cloud cover fraction. Okay, and they did this for 12 years worth of data here. Okay, so there are three curves here. The lower red curves are the oscillations of the cloud cover fraction over land. The black curves at the top are the cloud cover fraction variation over ocean. The blue curves in the middle are the cloud cover fraction over average for the whole Earth. Remember, there's 70% is ocean. So it's closer to the ocean value than it is to the land value. Okay. And you'll notice these things are oscillating in time annually. Okay. So again, I don't know who's right. Well, what is the albedo of reflectivity of clouds? So I'll go both ways. I'll say, okay, the AR6 and Wild et al. Say that the this 36% reflective clouds are 36% reflective. So I'll say, okay, so we have 340 watts per square meter incident. That means that from a variation from clouds here to here, that's 18 watts variation for a cloud that passes from the ocean to the land. For example, on the Pacific Ocean, we have, you notice that virtually all of weather controlling the whole United States or the North American continent is due to clouds, cover, and storms passing from the Pacific Ocean onto the North American continent. And so that's cloud cover has to change from somewhere. Okay, the average for the ocean cloud cover is about 75% cloud cover. For once it gets on land, it's the order of 50%, 54% cloud cover. So that's how much the cloud cover fraction must change, which means that it has to change minimally 18 watts per square meter. If you say cloud reflectivity is 0.36. On the other hand, if you say, well, okay, something was wrong with that, cloud reflectivity is more, clouds really are white. So we'll see, so it's 80%. That means we're changing the total loss of reflected solar power by the order of 55 watts. Remember, of course, we had the bad penny was 0.6 watts. So the clay with high confidence level. Okay. So these scales assume that 340 watts. Again, if you throw in the variation that you get from the Earth, the fact that the solar constant isn't constant, it's much bigger. Okay, so the left scale, as I pointed out, that's using IPCC's number, clear sky, or a cloudy sky albedo 0.36. Okay, and I've shown you earlier, and I do the calculation in an appendix on this for the order that this is what you get from the AR6 diagram. Okay, and the right-hand scale is what I'm using, the cloudy sky albedo of 0.8, which is kind of what you measure just flying over them in the DC-3. And even the Nobel Prize winner Manabe, the 21 Nobel Prize is at least 50%. So, as I mentioned before, if you throw in the additional variation due to the fact that the solar constant is not very constant, we're getting 77 watts variation. Okay. Moreover, this is not just a long-term value. You'll notice these red curves here. There's a dotted curve and a solid curve. And the same thing's true from the black curve. So it's a solid line and a dotted line associated. These are from the differences between the Terra and the Aqua satellites. They are in sun-synchronous orbits, very cleverly arranged, that they pass over the equator at the same time every day. And they pass 3 hours apart. And they're measuring the total reflected light effectively only 3 hours apart. And there are huge variations just in that 3-hour time period. So this is not just a long-term change. Okay. Now, if you compare this way back with one of my earliest slides, Stevens et al. 2015, he is totally unaware of the Terra and Aqua, the King analysis of the Terra and Aqua data. But it shows very clearly that this huge variation is due to cloud cover variation. So, conclusion, cloud cover variation, especially for clouds passing from the ocean to land, hugely modulates the outgoing solar sunlight, reflected sunlight power, and hugely changes the Earth's power imbalance. Okay, so how does this thermostat work? Okay, remember I pointed out that for most of for the ocean especially, virtually 3/4 of the input energy absorbed by the Earth's ocean is used not for warming the planet, but just simply for making clouds by evaporating seawater. So we have a hugely varying cloud cover fraction and albedo. Okay, so it works exactly the same way as does your common thermostat. Thermostat corrects for your house's temperature in the presence of a varying heat leak. Say you leave a bathroom window open, and you have a modest heat leak, the order of, say, 2 watts per square meter, which is what CO2 does. The thermostat corrects for that and keeps the temperature constant. So, okay, so it works just like the thermostat in your home. High cloud cover fraction, we have a large fraction of the area over the oceans is in shadows. They're present, so the furnace is off. Clouds are not present. The Earth, the furnace is on. As a result, the cloudy days are cooler than sunny days. So when the cloud cover fraction is too high and the furnace is off, sea surface temperature is low, and it's important that sunlight is needed to evaporate the seawater. That's where this 82 watts is coming from. So reduce the temperature, the evaporation rate now is reduced because of the high cloud cover. Okay, so the cloud cover immediately, since we're producing less water, very quickly we have dropped the evaporation rate of water, and the cloud cover fraction decreases from too high now back down to an equilibrium. Cloud cover is too low, exactly the opposite happens. So depending upon your assumptions on cloud albedo, whether or not you want to take the IPCC assumptions and or the DC3 measurements, you got anywhere between 18 to 55 watts of power available for the furnace for the Earth. That will easily stabilize the Earth's temperature, no matter what the CO2 concentration is. Okay, so how does this view work as a so-called feedback mechanism? The IPCC had a very important, what I would call a sacred task of calculating and measuring how climate stabilizing feedback mechanisms work. Okay, clearly the Earth's temperature, I mean, given the huge perturbations that we're getting from volcanism, increased Okay, the Earth's temperature has been amazingly constant. Actually, if you do the calculations, you wonder why is it so constant rather than why is it varying? That stability is due to the presence of natural feedback mechanisms. The people have noticed this for a long time. And the IPCC was given the task of calculating how strong are these feedback mechanisms. Okay, they have totally misidentified the strengths of the mechanisms. They do not they do not recognize this or even notice this straightforward, it seems to me, rather obvious thermostat mechanism that you get from cloud cover variations. They are totally ignore and never even mention this huge variation in cloud cover. King's et al.'s paper is never referenced by any of the IPCC reports. Okay, and now I'll show you here that if you view this cloud cover as a thermostat, it is by far the biggest, most powerful feedback mechanism. Okay, so where has this been discussed before? There was earlier I mentioned the National Academy report, and there is a very important paper by Sherwood et al. That Steve Koonin called my attention to. This is the Ringsburg Castle study, and there's also a whole reports. I use the calculation methodology used by Sherwood et al. Okay, they have unnecessarily, they assume the cloud cover fraction is independent of the surface temperature. It's clearly not. You increase the surface temperature very small amount, you dramatically change in the ocean, you dramatically change the evaporation rate of seawater. So if you remove that necessary assumption, which they put in totally arbitrarily, then you can calculate this feedback strength for my model. Okay, so I got the bottom in the appendix D, the last slide, to show you how to do that calculation. So they have a feedback strength parameter that they call the watts per square meter squared per degree Kelvin. And they claim that the net, when you sum all of them, is minus 1.6. Negative feedback is stabilizing, temperature stabilizing feedback. They also, the strongest component of that is what they call Planck feedback. That's totally misnamed. Planck discovered, Planck's radiation law discovered 20 years after Stefan Boltzmann. Should be called, but that's a different story. You can't even get the name right. So you could do this calculation either of two ways. You can assume the IPCC's cloud albedo of 0.36, and you get that you can calculate that the effective strength is minus 5.7, or you could go for my model is minus 12.7. If you use the DC3 measured values. Okay, and I've plotted those in for both scenarios in the next slide, and the net result is that okay. So is that part of the curve here. I was just copied right out of the IPCC's 2021 Sixth Assessment Report. Here they show the net, the total feedback strength, the -1. Okay. Various other mechanisms. Here's what they consider for clouds. They show that they claim it's a destabilizing effect. If you just plug in my calculation done correctly, depending upon, this is using the IPCC's estimate of cloud reflectivity. Here is the DC3 measurements of cloud reflectivity. Here is how strong the feedback mechanism. We're nowhere near tipping point. Okay, what are the conclusions then? I've introduced here the cloud thermostat mechanism, and I showed that it is overwhelmingly the dominant process controlling the climate. It controls and very strongly stabilizes the Earth's climate and temperature, and it prevents global warming and climate change. They claim that we have a very weak stabilizing effect, and the net result is they claim that tipping mechanisms can occur. My calculation shows I have an extremely strong feedback strength, and my mechanism's overwhelmingly dominant strength confirms that it's the dominant feedback mechanism controlling the Earth. Okay, and it gets its strength from this huge variation of cloud cover. That's what is stabilizing. Okay, so the nice thing about this mechanism is it produces nature's own solar radiation management system. There have been any number of geoengineering proposals made. One of them, for those of you who live in the Bay Area, remember there was a group trying to spray seawater in the air from the flight deck of the Hornet Museum in Alameda. And the Alameda City Council put down their foot. Total waste, ridiculous waste of time and money. The solar ray, the Earth has its own, that was trying to increase cloud, the Earth's number of clouds. There's a built-in, Earth has its own built-in solar radiation management system. It's built in, it works. The Earth has its own huge cloud factory called the oceans, especially the Pacific Ocean. That's half the surface area of the Earth. And it's free. All of these geoengineering proposals are proposed to cost literally trillions of dollars per year. Okay, so additional comment. The climate analysis set up by Ramanathan is highly flawed. He only has two independent portions, clear sky and cloudy sky. What King et al. Show is that you really need four. You need clear and cloudy sky over ocean. You need clear and cloudy sky over the land. These are four very important and very different areas. The IPCC totally ignores the importance of cloud cover variation. The IPCC totally ignores and appears to be totally and never even references these monumentally important observations, analysis of the Terra and Aqua satellite data by King et al. Okay, so what are my recommendations? I mean, the IPCC report starts with a recommendation to policy manufacturers. So I'm going to give you exactly that. Number one, there's other important things, providing a decent standard of living for enormous populations. There's corresponding a huge energy shortage crisis. The energy crisis is exacerbated by what I claim is incorrect climate science and by the government's associated incorrect muddled response. So government and businesses are needlessly spending trillions of dollars on efforts to limit greenhouse gases, CO2 and also methane. Importantly, CO2 and methane are not pollutants. They should be removed from every list of defined pollutants. That was Lisa Jackson under Obama, defined CO2 as a pollutant. No, it's not a pollutant. They have negligible effect on the climate. Trillions of dollars can be saved just simply by redefining the definition of pollutants. Okay, the IPCC has asked for trillions of dollars to be spent on stop greenhouse gas emission with what they call their zero carbon policy. This policy should be immediately terminated. Moreover, efforts to limit environmental carbon should be terminated immediately. Trillions of dollars can be saved by which are currently bankrupting the whole world's economy. Trillions of dollars can be saved by eliminating carbon caps, carbon credits, carbon sequestration, carbon footprints, zero carbon targets, carbon taxes, anti-carbon policies, fossil fuel limits. And in fact, the CO2 Coalition points out CO2 is actually good for you. It stimulates plant growth. So, moreover, government subsidy for electric vehicles, all the fallout from this is all electric power is being already in place in Berkeley. Solar and wind power should totally, if they can't stand on its own economically without subsidies, it should be eliminated. Fossil fuels are perfectly okay to use. All the solar radiation management systems and geoengineering processes are bad business models. They should be totally eliminated. These attempts to capture CO2 is totally silly. All the geoengineering to limit global warming. So to summarize all of this, the famous comment from Everett Dirksen that he made during the too much spending on the Vietnam War and Apollo programs, but I'll update it for inflation and the anti-carbon policies. A trillion here, a trillion there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. End of the presentation.
Wow.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Please
It's
ask
good
the questions about anything you didn't understand.
It's really good to have one of the world's leading quantum physicists look at the climate conversation issues. However, we've had Lord Monson on, and he did his little calculations, and he determined if we went to net zero, it would only reduce the climate of the Earth by 0.1 degree. I took some work from Greg Wrightstone and did some estimates on it, and his calculations would be if we went to net zero, it would lower the temperature of the Earth by 0.08 degrees. And basically, you're saying it's self-correcting. We all three have come to the conclusion that it's a very negligible number. And we're spending, as near as we can tell, about half of our GDP.
Yes.
To do this.
Billions of dollars.
To put it in perspective, for most people here that listen to this are not quantum physicists, we would have to take all the tax money we send to the government, we'd have to triple it. We'd have to send 2 more batches equivalent to your tax money in order to do this. It would be very hard on all the poor people in the world. It would eliminate the poor people. Right. And it would be a very big burden. It would destroy our society, and we would lose our freedoms. And we really did have long discussions on this before we jump into it. That's just where I'm coming from. And thank you very much for all you've done. I
fully agree that it's very, very dangerous, and worse yet, these are just what I would refer to as very poor business models, broken business models for the whole world and for the United States.
So, Dr. Klauser, though, what we have learned, or what I've learned from these discussions, is that in the Green New Deal, those trillions of dollars are going someplace to somebody. And so that's the green in the Green New Deal.
Yes. Indeed, yes. I think a serious problem is that the science has been hijacked, literally, and it's very clear in some of that apparently a lot of these scientific articles in science journals were not really written by the scientists, but apparently some politician or some government official stepped in and said, "Oh, we can't say that," and just simply went in and did the data, the fudging of the numbers. The pressure was done, and we've already come to the conclusion that that global warming is real, and we have to defend that. We wouldn't want to admit that we are wrong. The bad news, further bad news, is, and here I will blame Al Gore primarily, in that he introduced this as a political issue. And so correspondingly, this is the Green Party, if you will, was swept into and be a coalition with the Democratic Party. And so it has become, in the United States, a Republican versus Democrat issue. The Green New Deal, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this big champion of that, is the far left wing of the Democratic Party that is pressing that. The Green Party effectively has merged with the Democratic Party in the United States.
Wow. So, Dave, what's your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, well, I want to get the 97% of the scientists who have voted on something or created some sort of consensus and put this presentation in front of them and ask them to vote again. I'd like to take that survey one more time.
I dispute. There is no such survey. I don't know where that your number comes from. I certainly was not part of any such survey. These are just totally made up claims that 97%. In fact, the pictures that I've got from people who've actually done informal surveys, the number is far less than that. Most of the, and certainly now, there seems to be a difference between climate scientists and physicists. But I have yet to see any such survey, nor the results.
Dr. Klauser, I think I have an answer for you. I think it was the P.T. Barnum Survey Company that conducted that particular one. But it just now, it's all right in front of us in our general election, which is happening as we're filming this podcast. It's how you frame questions in survey work that determine that are determinative, right? So does the climate change? Is it variable? Well, yesterday, it was rainy and today it's sunny. So yeah, I guess so.
Yes, it changes. It's cold weather.
Yeah. But I want to say, I'm profoundly grateful for the time and energy and work and scientific method that you have brought to this question and to this time spent educating us. I sort of, I'm sort of relieved that, Kim, this is me answering your question. As a human being, as a father, as a grandfather, as a man, as an American, I'm relieved that that what I've observed all around me, my adult life, appears to be the truth, which is the Earth's a pretty great place to live, and freedom's a great way to live on it. I've not seen a single dire, forecast of impending doom come true. And quite the opposite. What I've seen is, and as you mentioned this earlier, the data provided by the very sources that claim the alarmism, there's a reduction in landfalling earth hurricanes. There's a reduction in forest fire acres burned. There's a reduction in the heat index in Dallas, Texas. We learned in one of our previous podcasts that there's a fix that's in, and it's going to be a challenge to overcome it. But this is the way to do it, with science, with reason, with well-intentioned people who favor practical, doable, and freedom-loving solutions that support human flourishing. Because I think at the end of the day, if we have to be grouped into two groups of people, the people who are pro-human and the people who are not, something tells me the pro-humans come on top in that fight.
Dave, wrap it up.
Oh, well, I'm just very, very grateful to you for taking my call in the first place, agreeing to come on this podcast, being with us, and laying down some important truths for all visitors to www.aclimateconversation.com, where you can not only see a remarkable library of very thoughtful and well-produced podcasts featuring some of the most important minds and most articulate people in the industry, and you can watch the film. If you've seen the film, highly recommend, go back, watch it again, share it with others. There's nothing like Socratic method to reveal inner truths, except this kind of hard scientific information. This is a really powerful way to help people understand the starkness of the choices that we face. Trillions of dollars, an anti-human agenda, a silly tilting at windmills over materials that can't be found and don't exist on a project that cannot work, that will bankrupt a world, or increase human flourishing, the end of energy poverty, the end of the noble savage concept for the billion people who live in such poverty in all around the world, but certainly in Africa. There's an opportunity here for us to embrace what is so gloriously good that was given to us on this earth, to shepherd it wisely, to be conscious of how we use it, careful in how we shepherd it, and thoughtful about how we spend its resources. You've made progress today in that regard, Dr. Klauser. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you to everybody.
Yes. Well, thank you for your vision. Thank you for your commitment. This is amazing and so awesome. And Dave, wow, that was amazing. And Dr. Klauser, thank you. Thank you for bringing truth to this. And we just really appreciate you.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.